The story I'm about to tell you isn't about the monster who broke my bones, but about the woman who broke my heart long before he ever laid a hand on me. I sat before the vanity mirror in my childhood bedroom, not to apply makeup for the evening's charity gala, but to perform a professional cover-up. My fingers, usually steady when analyzing financial statements, trembled slightly as I dabbed concealer onto the blooming purple bruise on my cheekbone. This particular wound wasn't a gift from my stepfather, Harrison, the man whose name was on the invitations. It came from my mother, a sharp, stinging slap delivered hours earlier out of fear that I would finally break the beautiful, silent lie our family was built on. Before I dive into my story, I'd really appreciate it if you could let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you'd consider subscribing to my channel. It would mean the world to me and help me keep sharing more stories like this. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Abigail. It began, as so many of our family's endings did, with a party. We were expected to attend a charity gala Harrison was hosting. A glittering affair where he would be lauded for his generous contributions to the city's cultural preservation. Our presence was non-negotiable, part of the perfect family portrait he meticulously maintained for public consumption. I had driven down from my apartment in the city for the weekend, a familiar ritual of obligation that always left a metallic taste of anxiety in my mouth. The argument started in the kitchen, a cavernous space of white marble and stainless steel that always felt more like a showroom than a home. I had asked a simple question about the lake house, a place steeped in memories of a life before Harrison, a life when it was just my mother and me. I saw the listing online, I said, keeping my voice casual as I stirred my tea. I didn't realize you were selling it. My mother, Carolyn, froze, her hand hovering over a tray of hors d'oeuvres she was arranging. Her eyes, once so full of life, darted nervously towards the hallway, as if Harrison himself might materialize from the shadows. It was just time for a change, she murmured, her voice thin and brittle. Harrison felt it was a poor investment, too much upkeep for how little we use it. The rehearsed quality of her words was a tell I had learned years ago. It was the voice she used when she was reciting a script written by him. I pushed, just a little, a foolish act of rebellion I could never seem to suppress. "But you love that place," I said softly. "We love that place." That was my mistake, by saying way. I had drawn a line in the sand, separating a past he was not a part of from the present he controlled utterly. Her composure cracked. She set the tray down with a clatter, her face a mask of panicked fury. "Stop it, Abigail!" she hissed, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "Just stop, you don't understand." I stood my ground. Understand what? That he's selling off every piece of your life that he wasn't a part of. The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. That's when she slapped me. It wasn't a wild, uncontrolled swing, but a sharp, precise strike, the crack echoing in the sterile silence of the kitchen. My head snapped to the side, a stinging heat blooming across my cheek. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not a mother defending her husband, but a prisoner terrified of having her cage rattled. "Don't you dare!" she said, her chest heaving, tears of fear, not anger, welling in her eyes. "You will not ruin this. You will not ruin everything." She turned and fled, leaving me alone with the throbbing pain in my face and the cold, heavy certainty that the mother I once knew was well and truly gone, replaced by this frightened stranger who would hurt her own daughter to protect the man who was destroying her. Later, I sat before the vanity mirror in my childhood bedroom, the room's soft pink walls a mocking reminder of a girl who no longer existed. My task was not to apply makeup for the evening's gala, but to perform a professional cover-up. My fingers, usually steady when analyzing financial statements, trembled slightly as I dabbed concealer onto the blooming purple bruise. It was a surreal moment, preparing to celebrate the man whose influence had led to my mother striking me. preparing to smile and applaud as he sold a piece of our history for a profit. The expensive silk dress hanging on the door felt like a costume for a part I no longer wanted to play. The part of the compliant, happy daughter in Harrison's perfect world. The desire to understand, to find a reason for the life my mother had chosen, became an obsession. The following afternoon, while Harrison was at a golf tournament and my mother was at a luncheon, I found myself wandering through the house, an archaeologist searching for artifacts of a lost civilization. I was looking for an old photo album, something to remind me of the woman my mother used to be. I went to the closet in her bedroom, a vast walk-in space filled with designer clothes that all bore Harrison's silent approval. Tucked away on the highest shelf, behind a stack of cashmere sweaters, was a plain cardboard box. It wasn't what I was looking for, but a gut feeling, a professional instinct, made me pull it down. Inside, beneath a layer of yellowed newspaper, were not photos, but stacks of documents, old bank statements, property deeds, and investment portfolios, all under my mother's name and all dating back to the first year of her marriage to Harrison. They were bundled neatly with rubber bands, a secret archive hidden away from the world. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I took the box to my room, locked the door, and began to piece together a puzzle I never knew existed. The story the papers told was chilling. I saw the systematic transfer of assets from my mother's name to a series of newly formed limited liability companies. I saw her signature on sale agreements for properties I knew she cherished, sold for fractions of their market value to corporations whose names I didn't recognize. She couldn't have understood what she was signing. Her expertise was in art history, not corporate law. He had used her trust, her willful ignorance, as a tool. But the truly damning discovery came when I cross-referenced the company names with public records. They were shell corporations, ghosts that existed only on paper, and their mailing addresses all led back to a single post office box Harrison had rented under an assumed name. It was a classic fraud scheme, elegant in its simplicity and breathtaking in its arrogance. The most sickening part was the charity connection. Large, tax-deductible donations from Harrison's development company were being funneled to these phantom charities, then laundered back into his personal accounts through a dizzying maze of transactions. He wasn't just an abuser. He was a sophisticated criminal. And he had made my mother the unwitting and legally culpable centerpiece of his entire operation. His control over her wasn't just about ego and cruelty. It was a business necessity. He had to keep her isolated and dependent to ensure his crimes remained buried. And I finally understood the sale of the lake house wasn't just about erasing the past. It was about liquidating another asset in her name before the paper trail got too hot. My mission crystallized in that moment. It was no longer about saving my mother. She had made it clear she didn't want to be saved. It was about exposing the truth. I began a secret. Parallel life. My visits home became intelligence-gathering operations. I used my skills as a financial analyst to build a case against him. Piece by excruciating piece. Late at night, when the house was silent, I would slip into his home office, a room that smelled of leather and self-importance, with a small encrypted USB drive. I copied files from his computer, downloading years of financial records, emails, and transaction logs. Each click of the mouse felt like a gunshot in the silent house. The fear was constant, a cold knot in my stomach. I photographed documents with my phone, my hands shaking so badly the first few attempts were blurry. I mapped out his entire network of deceit, a sprawling web of lies that stretched across a dozen fake companies and charities. The evidence was irrefutable. A detailed portrait of a man who had built an empire on theft and manipulation. My sanity was held together by the cold, methodical nature of the work. I was no longer a daughter. I was an auditor. And I was closing in on the truth. One night, the danger became terrifyingly real. I was in his office downloading a particularly large set of ledger files when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. He was home early. Panic seized me. The download was only halfway complete. I heard the front door open, his heavy footsteps echoing on the marble floor below. There was no time to escape unnoticed. In a split second of desperate clarity, I knew I had to create a diversion, a spectacle so loud and distracting it would pull his attention away from the second floor. I yanked the USB drive from the computer, shoved it into my pocket, and sprinted out of the office. I ran down the stairs just as he was walking into the foyer, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't look at him. I stormed past him and into the living room where my mother was reading. "I can't believe you!" I screamed at her, inventing a conflict on the spot. "I can't believe you would tell him what I said about my student loans. That was private." I threw every ounce of my fear and anger into the performance, my voice raw with manufactured outrage. My mother looked up, her face a mask of utter confusion. "What are you talking about, Abigail?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, but I didn't let her speak. I launched into a tirade, accusing her of betraying my trust, of always taking his side, of caring more about his opinion than her own daughter's feelings. I used words I knew would cut her deeply, weaponizing her own insecurities against her. It was the cruelest thing I had ever done. I saw the genuine hurt flash in her eyes, and I had to fight the urge to stop, to apologize, to tell her it was all a lie. But then I saw Harrison in the doorway, a smug, satisfied smirk on his face as he watched the scene unfold. He saw exactly what I wanted him to see, not a calculating threat, but a hysterical, emotional daughter throwing a childish tantrum. The diversion had worked, my secret was safe, but the cost was another piece of the already fractured bond between my mother and me. I knew my time was running out. I had the evidence, a comprehensive dossier of his crimes, stored on multiple encrypted drives, hidden in separate locations. I needed only one more piece of the puzzle. A key document I believed was kept in a safe behind a painting in his office. My final visit home was filled with a palpable sense of dread. The atmosphere at dinner was thick with unspoken tension. Harrison was unusually quiet, his eyes following my every move with a cold, analytical intensity that made the hair on my arms stand up. He knew. I don't know how he knew, perhaps a stray file I had forgotten to delete, a subtle change in my demeanor, but the certainty of it settled in my stomach like a block of ice. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through escape plans. Just after midnight, I heard it. Not a loud crash, but the quiet, deliberate splintering of the front door lock being forced. I was out of bed instantly, my body flooded with adrenaline. I didn't have time to run. Harrison appeared in my doorway, a dark silhouette against the pale light of the hallway. He moved with a chilling silence. Not the stumbling rage of a drunk, but the focused purpose of a predator. He didn't say a word. He walked to my desk, picked up my laptop, and threw it against the wall, the screen shattering with a sickening crunch. He turned to me, his face devoid of all emotion. I backed away until I hit the wall. The first blow came without warning, a closed fist to my jaw that sent stars exploding behind my eyes. I crumpled to the floor, stunned. As I tried to scramble away, he grabbed my right arm, twisting it behind my back with brutal efficiency. I screamed as a sickening pop echoed in the room, a white-hot, searing pain engulfing my shoulder through a haze of tears. I saw my mother standing in the doorway. She wasn't screaming or crying for help, she was just watching, her face a blank, unreadable slate. "Mom, please," I gasped, the words choked with pain. He slammed me against the wall again, and as I slid to the floor, my consciousness fading, I heard her voice, as cold and clear as ice. It wasn't directed at Harrison, it was directed at me. "I told you not to cause trouble, Abigail," she said, her tone flat, almost bored. "Now look what you've done." The absolute betrayal in those words was a pain far sharper than my dislocated shoulder. As the darkness closed in, I realized the truth. My mother wasn't a prisoner in a cage. She was a willing warden, and she would do anything to protect the gilded walls of her prison, even if it meant watching her own daughter be destroyed. The rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor pulled me back to consciousness. The world came into focus slowly. A white ceiling, the smell of antiseptic, and a dull, throbbing pain that seemed to radiate from every part of my body. A nurse explained my injuries: a dislocated shoulder, now reset, 2 fractured ribs, and a concussion. The police came next, 2 officers with tired eyes and gentle questions. My mother was with them. She had given a statement, they said, corroborating my story of the attack. She played the part of the horrified, helpless wife perfectly. In the hospital room, with a police officer sitting quietly in the corner, my mother tried to approach me. "Abigail," she began, her voice thick with practiced sorrow. "I was so scared." I simply looked at her, my eyes conveying the cold truth of what I had heard before I passed out. She faltered, her performance crumbling under my silent gaze. It was then that I made my decision, when the officer asked if I wanted to press charges against my stepfather. I looked directly at my mother and said, "No, I won't be pressing any charges." The shock on her face was immediate, a flicker of confusion quickly replaced by something that looked disturbingly like relief. Harrison, through his lawyer, would hear of my refusal and believe he had won, that he had silenced me for good. A week later, I was in a small, sparsely furnished apartment 3 states away. I had left with nothing but a single bag and the encrypted hard drives that held Harrison's entire world. My physical wounds were beginning to heal, my arm in a sling, the bruises on my face fading from purple to a sickly yellow. I had spent the week setting up a new life, a ghost in a city where no one knew my name. That evening, I turned on the news, my heart beating a calm, steady rhythm. And then I saw it. The lead story was a live shot from back home. The screen showed the grand entrance to our house, not with party guests arriving, but with a swarm of federal agents in jackets marked FBI and IRS. The camera zoomed in on Harrison being led out in handcuffs, his handsome face contorted in a mask of disbelief and rage. The news anchor's voice was a low hum in the background, explaining the stunning allegations of a multi-million-dollar charity fraud and tax evasion scheme. My revenge was never going to be a messy, emotional trial about a family dispute. It was a cold, clean, and absolute annihilation. The dossier of his crimes had been sent to the Department of Justice and the Internal Revenue Service via a dead man switch, a timed email set to dispatch if I didn't log into a secure server to stop it within 24 hours of the attack. It was my insurance policy. A final, silent move in a game he never even knew I was playing. I watched the news for a few more minutes, saw them lead my mother out for questioning, her face pale and drawn, the beautiful lie she had protected for so long now, a pile of smoldering ash at her feet. Then, I turned off the television. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the lights of a city I didn't know. I didn't go back. I didn't explain. I didn't apologize. Harrison would spend decades in prison, and Carolyn would lose everything she had traded her soul for. But EA had finally reclaimed the only thing that ever truly mattered: myself.